Good morning and welcome to the King Institute for Faith and Culture this morning. We're glad you're with us as we present one of our own, Dr. Abigail Cutter, to speak to us this morning. We do have a few events coming up. I'll let you know what they are briefly. After this event, this includes visitors as well, we will have coffee in the Tadlock House and some treats if you want to come over and have a minute to chat with Dr. Cutter. After that, please do join us in the Tadlock immediately following this. And then we'll be at lunch, especially faculty, staff, and also visitors. If you're interested in joining us, we'll be in the cafeteria in the Tipton room around 11:30. Dr. Cutter is also going to speak tonight at 7 o'clock at Emmanuel Episcopal Church. Next week, we have two more events, morning and evening, with Dr. Christina Bieber-Lake. And she comes to us as a now retired professor of English, but also somebody who has thought broadly about education. She's going to speak about AI, and she's going to speak about some other things, both morning and evening next week. And then we have one final event, but it's after the semester is over on May the 2nd. So you're very welcome this morning. Thank you for coming out, and let me tell you about Dr. Cutter. She has been at King now 3 years, is that correct? And came to us from Southwestern College in Kansas before, where she had a postdoctoral fellowship. She's a graduate of Wheaton College, originally from Kansas. She went to Regent School, the Regent School of Theology in Vancouver before doing her PhD at Southern Methodist University. Dr. Cutter is a specialist on the Sabbath. Here is a concept that she had to dig into both the ancient world into modern and contemporary theology of culture, into social theory, and many other things that made her new book possible. And we're going to be selling copies of the new book tonight. She's just finished the process of writing Sabbath and Culture, a Theology for Humans in Tension. So she's here at King teaching in theology courses. Many of you will have had a course with her. We are also delighted to have her mother here, and Seth, her husband, and Rosie and Colin are not with us this morning, but that's probably just as well. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Abigail Cutter.
Good morning. Thank you, Martin. Well, don't just do something, stand there. This is an instruction that was often heard in my undergraduate theater company. Apparently, it was originally stated by theater producer Martin Gable in 1945 when an actress was wildly gesticulating for no apparent reason. In our theater, the real insight was something like this. If you just motor on through everything, odds are you'll rush. But it can also be a way of avoiding some of the most important parts of being alive, facing yourself, including the problem of your own existence, coming face to face with other people, truthfully, in your own skin. Sometimes, we learned, you have to do nothing but breathe before you can build back up to doing anything else while really meaning it. So as Dr. Dodderwyk mentioned, today we're celebrating the release of my book, and I'm so thankful for the opportunity to do this with you all. But this morning, I'm not really addressing the main argument of the book. Instead, for this conversation, I've been thinking about interactions and conversations I've had with King students, where I've gotten to hear about what you all think thriving looks like, and how you want to thrive more. And these conversations really do go to the heart of why I think the idea of the Sabbath is important. So that's really where I want to start. If I can get a little assistance making this work, I'd appreciate that. But I recently gave an assignment in a King 4000 class where I asked students to find a member of an older generation in their family, a parent, grandparent, uncle. Thank you so much. They were meant to gather as much as possible about their family history, including the values, gifts, or even burdens of that legacy. I asked them to reflect on what about that they want to carry on, what they might want to do differently. Is that going now? Thank you. Awesome. All right. And this was an absolutely delightful assignment to hear people talk about. I really enjoyed the stories, and it sounds like the students really got into that as well. But one thing that stood out to me that students tended to have in common was the most common adjective they used to describe their families was hardworking. And this is something that students were really very proud of, something they wanted to carry on generally. And I resonate with this too. I also have a lot of relatives, a lot of family members who not only have been hardworking, but who would identify that as one of the most important traits that they care about. But then as I started hearing this value in story after story, I noticed the word kept coming up despite a whole range of different kinds of family experiences. And I started to wonder, what work is this adjective doing? Why is this so important? What are the beliefs or values or narratives that are packed into this one little word? And so I noticed and reflected on a few possibilities. And this doesn't just pertain to students. It can pertain to any of us whose family legacy includes hard work. So in some situations, the story is one where people have worked really hard, but they haven't experienced economic prosperity. They might be struggling. They might be stressed. They might be in poverty. So to hang on to this word hardworking in a situation like this seems to be a way of highlighting what is really admirable in these parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. There's moral worth regardless of whether it has led to any kind of visible or measurable success. So when someone is telling a story this way, it's a way of emphasizing the dignity of the family. And I really connected when I heard these stories. I appreciated the pride that was being claimed. And even when another generation maybe does meet with success or does have an easier life, they're able to hang on to this value and say, there's continuity. Even though my life might be easier in one way or another, I want to maintain what my ancestors had a right to be proud of. And in other situations, the story is one of prosperity. Maybe you can tell the family has been really well off. And so when somebody is telling a story emphasizing the hard work in these cases, there's a causal link being claimed between the hard work that the people did and the success that they had. The success is evidence of the hard work. And furthermore, to tell a story about how a family is hardworking in a situation with prosperity might, not necessarily, but I think often does, imply a general belief about how prosperity is reached. Hard work leads to prosperity. It might not just refer to this particular family's experience, but in general, if you work hard, you will experience prosperity. A third type of story that could be behind the word hardworking is one in which a family didn't just experience poverty, but maybe outright mistreatment. Maybe a mining company just never seemed to let those grandparents get ahead or even catch up. Maybe one family member had to hold the pieces together after other family members up and left. They had to go through things they really shouldn't have had to go through. So for these folks to tell their stories by highlighting a legacy of hard work, they're doing more than claiming a virtue they can be proud of. They're taking back agency, preserving dignity that has been under threat because of some kind of exploitative situation. It might be a way of saying, sure, maybe we could tell the story as if it's been one of oppression, but maybe I don't want to tell the story that way. I don't want to identify as somebody who could be had, somebody who could be used or mistreated, taken advantage of. And you may not want to tell that part of the story, even if it's true, even if it's not anybody's fault, even if it's not your fault. So while the folks who held it together despite everything may want to emphasize their own resilience and their own hardworking character, this way of telling the story also risks hiding the failures of the people who've let them down or taken advantage. Because those mining companies or those factory owners would be more than happy to praise their own people as hardworking. Extolling the virtues of underpaid or mistreated employees can be a way of encouraging them to keep putting up with it, right? So this narrative of hard worker does something for both parties. But there's also something else that can be going on behind this word hardworking. Sometimes, no matter which of those three categories, or maybe other categories, a group falls into, to claim the identity of hardworking can sometimes mean we are more worthy than those people over there, whoever they might be, whoever I don't count as hardworking. So it might be a way to distinguish you from somebody else. Behind hardworking can sometimes be the subtext, we don't need help. And if we did need help, we wouldn't be worthy anymore. So the implication is clear about what you think about whoever it is over there who does need help or does accept help. Now, I'm showing sculptures by a sculptor, David Robinson, who works in Vancouver. I've seen some of his art up close. Really found it powerful. So that's most of what you're seeing on the slideshow today. I want you to see this particular image from another angle. In the first image, you can see this climber is going up a ladder, and that there's a wire attached to the ladder, and that the ladder is also the wire is attached to his lower ankle. But in this image, you can see that the wire attached to his ankle is also attached to the bottom of the ladder. So it seems like in this closed system, this climber is under the impression that he can lift the ladder with himself as he climbs up the ladder. And the more you think about it, the more you realize, poor guy, how much progress does he really think he can make this way? I thought it was a pretty good depiction of those of us who think we can't ask for help. Maybe we take pride in not needing help or in being strong enough. Oh, and by the way, we like to imagine that our success so far comes from never having needed help before. But if you zoom out just a little bit farther, you realize that kind of thinking has got you trapped. But why? Why is it a trap? If being hardworking becomes such a central piece of your identity that it marks out your worth, and you would never want to be like those people over there who can't keep up, then the result is that there is literally no limit to what we will expect of ourselves and by extension others. We'll be driven by that sense of shame to work endlessly, even if it goes against our better judgment. Think about that word hardworking for a moment. A classic definition of a virtue, and this comes from the Greek philosopher Aristotle, is a mean between extremes. So self-control is somewhere between starving yourself and overindulging. Courage is somewhere between cowardice and recklessness. You get the point. But the word hardworking doesn't work like that, does it? There is no limit to how hardworking you could be. I mean, I suppose you could work yourself to death, but there is no limit built into the concept itself. If hardworking is our main guiding virtue, we could destroy ourselves and still be honored for it. But I see evidence that my students are picking up on this. Because alongside the pride that I heard about their hardworking family legacies, I heard another theme. Several students said that as much as they are proud of the hard work and the other virtues, they would like to be better at recognizing their limits than maybe some of their parents or grandparents were. Or they observed in their parents or grandparents a difficulty being gentle with themselves or with others. It was almost as if these folks felt under so much pressure just to survive that they didn't think they had the luxury to be gentle with themselves. I also saw among some folks a desire to develop more emotional intelligence, more ability to handle complexity in a way that some of these folks didn't seem to have the opportunity to develop. And in all of these responses, I'm sensing a real compassion. These perspectives are not a matter of being overly critical of these other people in their lives. There's a deep level of respect, a deep level of cherishing. And also, you can almost sense an ache to say, wow, my grandma, my great-grandpa, they went through so much. I would love for them to have experienced the ability to ask for help. Or maybe they went through so much that they never had the ability to develop some of these other capacities that they wanted to. So there's so much love and generosity built into these stories. You want to extend mercy. You want to extend rest to these beloved family members. I also want to mention another kind of conversation I sometimes have. In another classroom, I'll talk about radical monastic movements. St. Benedict, for instance, who set up a rule of life for monks to live in community and serve one another. Or later, St. Francis, who saw that by his time, the monasteries had accumulated too much dead weight, and he decided to leave it behind. Well, these pioneers saw something wrong with the status quo, and they decided to leave it behind. They said, I'm going to take a little group of friends and build something different, something out of step, maybe a little bit of a protest movement. So I'll ask my students, if you were to develop some kind of radical way of life, what would it be? How would it respond in protest to something that is disordered about our time? And what I often hear is that students feel a need for a community with a way of life that's a bit simpler, maybe slower, maybe more connected to the earth, more connected to each other. And sometimes, interestingly, the specifics are focused on sustainability for the earth. And sometimes the specifics are focused on sustainability for the human experience. But it is really interesting that almost every lifestyle choice they mention addresses both. Isn't that interesting? When people identify something that is sustainable for the earth, it turns out that it fits right in with a way of life that would be more sustainable for humans. I think that pairing is really remarkable. The things that end up seeming like a burden to us are often the very things that make us a burden on creation. But across both of these assignments, you see a pattern, right? People are wanting to build a way of life that's more humane, in contrast to a sink-or-swim norm that sometimes feels ruthless. And in response to these observations and desires, I want to explore with you a biblical concept that not everybody is aware of or has had the opportunity to contemplate. The Sabbath goes in and out of style, but it's largely been underemphasized in Christian history. And I don't have time to get into the story of why we've missed out on it a lot, but I really think that today we really need to know about the Sabbath. And I see the Sabbath that God gives in his commandments as a way of defending human well-being. It is for the good of humans that the Sabbath was created, after all. There's a story in the book of Mark where Jesus' disciples are walking through a field on the Sabbath day, which is the seventh day of the week, the Jewish day of rest. And they pick some grains of wheat for a snack as they're walking through the field. Well, some of the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, observe this and take it up with Jesus. You are a religious leader, and some of your closest followers are breaking the Sabbath by harvesting on the Sabbath day. Well, what Jesus says at this point actually isn't original to him. He quotes the Pharisees' own wisdom, which is that human beings certainly aren't meant to be slaves to the Sabbath, but rather the Sabbath, by its very existence, is actually meant for the well-being of humans. So I think what the Pharisees needed to hear was give the disciples a break. They needed a snack. There was some food. They had a snack. The Pharisees' interpretation of the Sabbath wasn't turning out true to its purpose. But I think what we need to hear is really the same statement by Jesus, but with the emphasis placed a little differently. In our society, where we're supposedly so interested in being humanitarian, in human rights, the human good, benefiting people, making the world a better place, and so on and so forth, maybe it's not good that we've forgotten the day of rest, because the human good is the whole point of the Sabbath in the first place. So let's rewind and go back to that first place, the origin of the Sabbath. You need to know that before there were any Christians, God created a covenant with this ancient Hebrew people group who became known as the people of Israel. And the moment where this people group really comes into being is called the Exodus. Leading up to this moment, the Hebrew people have been slaves of the Egyptian pharaohs for generations, and they've been worked relentlessly. The demands for their work have kept rising, rising, rising. And this is the original picture the Bible gives us of what it looks like when people are valued for nothing other than the work that they do. And I use the phrase total work here, which comes from the 20th century philosopher Joseph Pieper. And Pieper reflected on how important it is for people not to be reduced to their work value. Even in the 1950s, when he wrote, he saw Western society at risk of taking a turn toward total work, where we were at risk of valuing people only for the work they do and only valuing forms of education for the way that they form future employees. He saw this as a real danger to the health of a society. So when we think about this society of total work, I can't get any closer than that stark biblical image of the Hebrews enslaved in Egypt. So then, God calls this people group to have a relationship with him. And the first thing he does is free them from this situation. God is a God who liberates, not just who creates and who preserves. And in this process of liberating them, he forges a covenant with them. So in other words, they're not just free to do whatever they want, to have no purpose. They have a specific purpose, which takes its shape in relationship with God. And when he explains to them what it means to look, what it's meant to look like to live into their full purpose, and they really have this special privilege to reflect their value in a much bigger way than the Egyptians had ever let them, he gives them a set of instructions. And you know these instructions as the 10 Commandments. One of these 10 Commandments, the one that Christians are most likely to forget about, is the Sabbath commandment, the fourth commandment. And this says that every week the people will work for 6 days. They'll do all their work in that time. But then that seventh day is a Sabbath, a day of ceasing. And it's a sacred day in honor of the Lord their God. And they must rest on that seventh day. It's no accident that this is included in the covenant that God makes with them right after liberating them from a situation where they were reduced to their labor value. And here's the text. It's kind of small. I'll read it for you. From Exodus. It shows up twice, once in Exodus and one in Deuteronomy, both with a slightly different emphasis. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, it says in Exodus. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. So there are several things going on here that I want you to notice. The basics are laid out. 6 days work, seventh day rest. The Sabbath is consecrated specifically to God. Interestingly, the people who are directly addressed are those who are presumably going to be the property owners and decision makers in their family systems. But the day of rest doesn't just apply to those who have control over their own time. It applies to dependents. It applies to children, but also slaves. You might be wondering, if you're paying attention, why are we talking about slaves when the people have just been liberated from slavery? Didn't we get rid of that? That is a very appropriate critique. Though, in a society without a mobile workforce, another good term here would be dependent laborer, people who didn't own their own property, so had to attach themselves to another household to survive. The key thing here is that even these dependent laborers are not supposed to be treated the way the Israelites were treated in Egypt. They are not supposed to be reduced to their value as the ability to get things done. They are human beings, and this day of the Sabbath is meant to show that no matter what status someone has, they all have equal dignity and they deserve to thrive. So the people who are property owners must provide abundantly enough for all the members of their household so that people can not only thrive, but have a day of rest to enjoy their full humanity. And notice it's not just the Israelites who are supposed to experience this Sabbath rest either. It also applies to the non-Israelites who are part of their communities. So this basic human dignity applies to everyone. But it goes farther. Farm animals also are not supposed to be working on the Sabbath. You can't just set up the oxen to tread the grain or stomp on the grapes or something on the Sabbath as long as humans take a rest. No, the animals matter too. If you go back to the story of creation, the land was created before human beings, the animals were created before human beings, and God declares them good before they're any use value to humans. And the Sabbath reaffirms that. There's one more passage I didn't include here, but you need to know that elsewhere in the instructions God gives the people, the land itself gets a Sabbath. Every seventh year, it's not supposed to be harvested or planted. So it's not just the human community, but also the animals and the land. They all have an intrinsic value that precedes the usefulness that they represent to humans. And the Sabbath reaffirms that sacredness of God's entire creation. And the rationale that we have in this passage draws on the pattern that God himself followed at creation. And so when human beings are invited to keep the Sabbath, this is how we reflect the image of God. Yes, God is active, creates, keeps, cares for creation, so we're meant to do those things too. But we're also meant to share in God's rest, reflecting that incredible dignity that he's given us. Now, the second passage, I won't spend as much time on this, but look at the very end, or I'll read it to you. It's the same instructions. It applies to the same groups of people and the animals as well. But the rationale is, so that your male and female slaves may rest as well as you. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Two passages, two rationales, but in different ways, they both emphasize the fact that no one is reducible to their labor value. And this is true, interestingly, whether someone else is making those decisions for you or whether you're making decisions for yourself. If you're the vulnerable employee, the Sabbath comes as an act of mercy, a breath of fresh air. But maybe you're the property owner. Maybe you're the business owner. Maybe you're the one with the high billable rate. And you work nonstop because you enjoy the glory that feels like it's accruing to you because of what you can accomplish during all your working hours. In that case, the Sabbath can feel like a rebuke. But the point is that no matter your status, a life of total work actually falls short of your dignity as a bearer of God's image. So God is saying to the people, don't act like you're back in Egypt, and don't treat yourself or anybody else like that. But God knows we have a hard time preserving these immeasurable values, these things that can't be quantified. As long as there's money to be earned, it's very tempting to work a little more or demand a little more of other people. So the Sabbath becomes this boundary. It may feel arbitrary, but it actually defends some of those most sacred things, including the dignity that we're all too willing to trade for money or efficiency. So that's, in short, how I see the Sabbath as really a defense of human well-being. But here's where we get to the point where we talk about what we're doing here on campus and how it connects to any of this. I've called this talk In Defense of Humans, the Sabbath, and the Point of a Liberal Arts School. One of the things King calls itself is a university in the liberal arts tradition. But both of the words in that funny little phrase really deserve an explanation. Art, first of all, is really just an old-fashioned word that means a skill or a discipline. It could include painting or dance for sure, but it doesn't have to be the fine arts. It's any skill, so it could really include any of the subjects that we teach here. And the word liberal, wow, that has a lot of meanings, but in this context, it doesn't mean left-wing or progressive or big government or any of these contemporary political associations. Liberal comes from the word for freedom. So when we're talking about a liberal education, we're talking about the kind of education that befits a free person. And this concept goes all the way back, again, to ancient Greece, where in Athens, a large number of people, still not everybody, but the largest number of people up until that point, were expected to participate in government. So if all the free men who lived in Athens were going to participate in government, they needed to be pretty well equipped. They needed to be able to think about what's a good life, what's justice. They were expected to think at a pretty sophisticated level. So still to this day, when we talk about the liberal arts, we're talking about all the skills and disciplines that are suited to people who are free. What do I mean by that, really? It's any skill set, any ways of thinking, disciplines that are appropriate to people who know that they are more than their job. They're not only valuable for their usefulness, but I also mean that element of people who are participants in a self-governing society. In an American society, most adults are responsible for where we go as a country. So if we want to remain free and worthy of our freedom, the people of the country also have to be thoughtful. We have to be able to handle complexity, take responsibility for our collective actions and their consequences. Which also brings me to another element here. Free people, truly free people, aren't just focused on ourselves. A free person thinks like a leader, looks out for the well-being of other people. They're able to zoom out and think about the big picture. Now, a liberal arts education can be hard work for sure, so there's no way that I mean to say that when we give you homework, we expect it to be relaxing or exactly what you would do with your free time. And then we certainly expect you to be able to work hard throughout your life toward various goals. But there is a nuance in values that I want to talk about here. As a character trait, hardworking goes in one direction. It goes from 0 to 10, from the minimum to the maximum. You crank it up. If you're meant to be hardworking, it may not require a lot of thought, but it does require a lot of horsepower. On the other hand, if the value you want is discernment, now you need to ask yourself which direction you're going to go. You know, in one situation, you're the ox pulling the cart and somebody else is setting the direction. If the issue is discernment, you're the one having to decide, okay, which way is it worth pulling the cart? What work is worth doing? And so you get to ask all these kind of more complicated questions. Yeah, of course you want to be hardworking, but which direction? What work is worth doing? Why are you doing what you're doing? What makes a good life in the first place, whether that's for yourself or society? Now, you got to be thinking pretty critically. Do I just want to be participating in the economy wherever I can make a buck? Or, okay, so the economy is what it is, but supply and demand isn't necessarily a great judge of what's good for people. You know, Big Macs sell and Big Macs kill. So being truly free doesn't just mean asking what you can do to plug yourself in somewhere, but what's really worth doing. It's also not just a matter of jumping in. It's also a matter of looking around and thinking about how do you assess what's going on? How do you explain? To contribute well requires the time and discipline to understand and then give an accurate account of it. So you'll want to ask not just what direction do I want to go, but also when is it time to stop? And then finally, there's that important question, what things are worthwhile in and of themselves? What things have a value other than their exchange value? Do I really want to exchange beauty for money or convenience, or goodness or truth? Do those things have monetary value? Have I cultivated them, or only the things that have monetary value? So when we think about the kind of education that we hope we're offering at King, or really any kind of education, any kind of school in the liberal arts tradition, it's not just a matter of job preparation, it's a matter of thinking about how to live an entire life that's worthy of your dignity as an image bearer of God. But I want to address one more question, because not everybody is sitting here, not everybody is at King or a similar school. A lot of people don't choose to, and a lot of people don't get to have this particular kind of education. When you were talking about some of your family members who took other paths in life, I heard this profound respect whether they were prosperous or poor or suffered unfairly, and you have such a deep respect for the values they gave to you, whether or not they had access to what you have access to. So I want to ask, does everyone need the liberal arts? Because it might seem, based on what I've said so far, that a life without the liberal arts is somehow less dignified. But here's what I want to say about that. Everyone, every last person is made in God's image. Every last person is worth more than their work, no matter what their job training is. Any type of work does not sum up the worth of the person. So if you are training to be an engineer or a lawyer, that does not make you any more dignified than your grandpa who went into mining because that was the only option, right? Furthermore, everybody should have the opportunity to develop the parts of themselves that have a worth beyond measure. For instance, everybody should have the opportunity to rest for their mental and physical and spiritual health. They should have the opportunity to appreciate beauty, to express themselves creatively in some form or another, to cultivate community, to play a role in self-government. Everyone should have the opportunity to worship. And I'm not expecting everyone to be religious or religious in the same way, but I'm including it on this list because it's how we come face to face with what is of ultimate value. What's the source of all other worth? But despite the fact that everyone has this incredible transcendent value and deserves to participate in things that cultivate that, not everyone is going to develop themselves in the same way. Even in an ideal world, not everybody wants the same kind of formation. But we don't live in an ideal world, and not everyone has the opportunity to develop as they would like. So, for those who do have the opportunity to cultivate themselves in specific reflective habits, and especially in these habits that you learn in higher education, resources and disciplines that allow you to do specific kinds of reflection with accountability and at a high level, I think you have an added responsibility, which is to spread thriving as far as possible. I saw this when a lot of students were thinking about those grandparents that they really wished didn't have to work themselves to the bone, or how they wished that they had the opportunity to learn that it was okay to ask for help. And you saw these people whom you respected and cherished, but you wanted something for them that their struggle didn't allow. So the task of people with this remarkable opportunity of a liberal arts education, I think, is to look around the world and try to invite as many people as possible to experience the fullness of their dignity as they reflect the image of God. Extend rest. So then when you think about all the stories of people that you've heard, people in your family, other people in society, people who are struggling, what can you do with these skills that you're gaining now? Maybe in your leadership classes in business, your education classes, criminal justice, political theology, and so on. You can start asking, what stories aren't being told? What parts of these stories aren't being heard or understood? What puzzle pieces are missing? And then you draw on what you're learning in those English writing classes or speech or theater. How can you use your words to speak truth in a way that will liberate or a way that will give dignity? Then what other disciplines do you need to know to give an account of the complexity in the world? What accounting principles do you need to know to free people to thrive? What are you learning in biology that helps you stand in awe of God's creation and understand the care that it needs? How about in education or psychology classes, things that help you think critically about human development? What about history or criminal justice that helps you understand the difficulties that we're facing in society? From there, think creatively. What does justice look like? What does thriving look like? What might healing look like? So that, I would say, is the task of folks who have this privilege of a liberal arts education. You understand it isn't just a ticket to a better job. It's a vantage point from which you can do that work of discernment. What direction is thriving? And then how can you extend that thriving as far as possible? Yeah, it comes with a responsibility. But when you think about how Jesus bears all of our burdens, then to bear one another's burdens becomes a joyful task. And it's not a matter of just putting your nose to the grindstone and working yourself to the bone. It's a matter of cultivating a sense of joy and a sense of delight. So I'd like to invite you not just to do something. Instead, take a risk and stand there. Stand there and face yourself. Stand there and face your Maker. Stand there and be in awe of the things in the world. Stand there and stare complexity in the face. Stand there and ask the hard questions. Stand there and receive God's gifts. Stand there and know that God is God. Jesus says, again, one more sculpture by David Robinson, one of my favorites. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Thank you.
Again, if you want to join us for coffee or some treats, we'll be at the Tadlock House after this, and Dr. Cutter will be speaking again this evening at Emmanuel Episcopal. Thank you for being with us. Go and do good.